The scream tore through the crowded Santa Monica pier like a gunshot, sharp and jarring, silencing the chatter of tourists and the hum of street performers. A young woman, no older than 19, crumpled to the ground, her wheelchair toppling sideways as a policeman loomed over her. His baton raised, face twisted in anger. In that frozen moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, except for one man, whose eyes locked on the scene, his heart a furnace of rage and love, ready to burn the pier to ashes. Miles Carter, 26, stood at the edge of the pier, his calloused hands gripping the railing as the salty breeze stung his face. His blonde hair danced in the wind, and his hazel eyes, usually warm, were clouded with worry. Beside him, in a sleek wheelchair customized with vibrant blue accents, sat his boyfriend, Ezra Nguyen, 24, whose sharp wit and quiet resilience had stolen Miles' heart 2 years ago at a veterans fundraiser in San Diego. Ezra, a Vietnamese American with a lean frame and deep brown eyes, had been born with spinal muscular atrophy, but his spirit was a wildfire, untamed, radiant, unstoppable. They'd come to the pier for a rare day of normalcy, a break from Ezra's physical therapy and Miles' grueling shifts as a paramedic. The Santa Monica sunset painted the sky in hues of coral and gold, and for a moment, they were just two guys in love, sharing soft laughs over a melting ice cream cone. But normalcy was a fragile thing, and it shattered when the scream rang out. Miles' head snapped toward the sound. A girl, Lila, he'd later learn, lay sprawled on the wooden planks, her wheelchair overturned, her dark braids splayed across the ground. She was young, her face pale with shock, her legs twisted at an unnatural angle, betraying her disability. Above her stood Officer Daniel Holt, a broad-shouldered man in his 30s, his face flushed with authority gone rogue. His baton gleamed under the fading light, and the crowd's murmurs grew into a restless hum. "What the hell?" Ezra whispered, his hands tightening on his armrests. Miles felt the familiar surge of protectiveness, the kind that had drawn him to Ezra in the first place. A need to shield, to fight, to make the world softer for the man he loved. She was mouthing off. Holt barked, his voice cutting through the crowd's unease. Resisting. You saw her. But the onlookers didn't nod in agreement. Their phones were out, filming, their faces a mix of horror and disbelief. Lila's voice, trembling but defiant, rose from the ground. "I didn't do anything. I just asked why you were yelling at him." Miles followed her gaze to a teenage boy, maybe 16, cowering nearby, his clothes tattered, his eyes wide with fear. A street vendor's cart was overturned, fruit scattered across the pier. The pieces clicked together. Holt had been harassing the kid, and Lila, in her wheelchair, had spoken up, and now she was paying for it. Ezra's hand grazed Miles' arm. "We have to do something," he said, his voice low but urgent. Miles nodded, already moving, his paramedic instincts kicking in. He knelt beside Lila, checking for injuries, his hands steady despite the fury coiling in his chest. "Hey, I'm Miles. I'm a paramedic. Can you tell me if you're hurt?" Lila's eyes, a striking green, met his. "My shoulder," she whispered, wincing. "And my pride." Her attempt at a smile broke Miles' heart. He glanced at Ezra, who was maneuvering his wheelchair closer, his jaw set. Ezra wasn't one to stay on the sidelines, disability or not. "Officer," Miles called, standing, his voice calm but edged with steel. "She needs medical attention. Back off." Holt's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the baton. "Stay out of this, pretty boy," he sneered. "Unless you want trouble too." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, phones still recording. Miles felt Ezra's presence behind him, a quiet anchor. He knew they were stepping into a storm, but he'd faced worse. Car accidents, overdoses, bar fights. Nothing scared him more than failing the people he loved. Then, a new figure pushed through the crowd. A man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a limp that spoke of old wounds, moved with a predator's grace. His eyes, the same green as Lila's, burned with a fury that made even Holt pause. The man's voice was low, lethal. "You touched my daughter." The peer fell silent. The man's presence was a thundercloud, heavy with unspoken promises of retribution. Miles didn't know it yet, but this was Victor Kane, Lila's father, a retired Navy SEAL whose scars told stories of battles won and lost. And in that moment, Miles realized this wasn't just about Lila or the peer. It was about a reckoning. Victor Kane's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He knelt beside Lila, his hands gentle but trembling with restrained rage as he righted her wheelchair and helped her into it. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his tone softening for her alone. Lila nodded, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm fine, Dad. I couldn't let him bully that kid." Victor's jaw tightened, and he stood, facing Holt. The officer shifted, his bravado faltering under Victor's gaze. "She was interfering with an arrest," Holt said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Arrest?" Victor's laugh was cold. "For what? Selling oranges without a permit? Or for standing up to you?" He stepped closer, and though he was a head shorter than Holt, he seemed to tower over him. "I saw what you did. So did they." He nodded at the crowd, their phones still raised, capturing every word. Miles exchanged a glance with Ezra, who was watching Victor with a mix of awe and caution. Ezra leaned forward, his voice quiet. "Miles, this guy's not just a dad. He's something else." Miles nodded, his paramedic training keeping him focused. He checked Lila's shoulder, dislocated, likely, but not broken. "We need to get her to a hospital," he said, loud enough for Victor to hear. Victor's eyes flicked to Miles, assessing him. "You a doctor?" "Paramedic," Miles said. "She needs an X-ray and a sling. I can stabilize her until we get there." Victor gave a curt nod, his trust hard-earned but given in that moment. "Do it." As Miles worked, wrapping Lila's shoulder with a makeshift sling from his backpack, Ezra wheeled closer to the teenage boy, who was still crouched by the overturned cart. "Hey," Ezra said softly. "I'm Ezra. What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then mumbled, "Javier." His eyes darted between Holt and the crowd, like a trapped animal. "You're okay now," Ezra said, his voice steady, the kind that could calm a storm. "What happened?" Javier's story spilled out in fragments. He was 16, an undocumented immigrant from Guatemala, selling fruit to help his mom pay rent. Holt had been shaking him down for weeks, demanding protection money. When Javier couldn't pay today, Holt had flipped his cart. Lila, passing by in her wheelchair, had called Holt out, and he'd lost it. Ezra's fists clenched, but his face stayed calm. "We're gonna fix this," he promised, though he wasn't sure how. He glanced at Miles, who was finishing with Lila, and felt a surge of pride. Miles was his rock, his partner in every sense, and together they'd faced down prejudice before. Ezra for his disability, Miles for his openness about their relationship. But this felt bigger, uglier. Holt, sensing the tide turning, raised his voice. "This is a police matter. Disperse, or I'll arrest every one of you." The crowd didn't budge. Victor stepped forward again, his limp more pronounced but his presence unshaken. "You're done, Holt," he said. "You think you can hit my daughter and walk away? You don't know who you're dealing with." Miles caught the glint in Victor's eyes. A soldier's promise, a father's vengeance. He knew this wasn't just about Lila's shoulder or Javier's cart. It was about justice, the kind that burned slow and fierce. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the pier in shadow, Miles felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just a moment, it was the start of a fight. By the time the ambulance arrived, the crowd had grown, their phones now a chorus of truth-tellers. Miles helped load Lila onto a stretcher, her green eyes fierce despite the pain. Victor stayed close, his hand on her wheelchair, his gaze never leaving Holt, who was now flanked by two nervous officers who'd just arrived. Ezra, still near Javier, was talking softly, keeping the boy grounded. "You're not alone," Ezra said, his own experiences with being underestimated fueling his empathy. "We're gonna make sure everyone knows what happened." Miles overheard, his heart swelling. Ezra's strength wasn't in his legs but in his soul, and it anchored Miles in moments like this. He caught Ezra's eye, and they shared a look that said everything. "I'm here, I love you, we'll get through this." At the hospital, a sleek facility in West Los Angeles, Miles stayed with Lila while Victor filled out paperwork, his hands shaking with barely contained fury. Ezra, meanwhile, was on his phone, uploading the crowd's videos to social media, tagging local news outlets. "This needs to go viral," he muttered, his fingers flying over the screen. "Holt's not getting away with this." Lila, now in a proper sling, spoke up from her hospital bed. "It's not just him," she said, her voice steady despite the painkillers. "Cops like Holt, they target people like Javier, like me, because they think we're weak. I'm sick of it." Miles nodded, his jaw tight. He'd seen it too, patients ignored, dismissed, or worse because of who they were. "We're not letting this go," he promised. Victor returned, his face grim. "I made some calls," he said, his voice low. "Holt's got a history, excessive force, complaints swept under the rug. But this time he picked the wrong fight." Ezra looked up from his phone. "The videos are spreading. People are pissed. There's a protest forming at the pier tomorrow." Victor's eyes narrowed, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. "Good. Let's give them something to protest about." Over the next few hours, Miles and Ezra stayed at the hospital, coordinating with Lila and Victor. Miles called his paramedic colleagues, who'd seen similar abuses and were ready to speak out. Ezra, with his knack for organizing, connected with local activists, including a queer advocacy group he'd worked with before. The group, led by a fiery trans woman named Sasha, promised to amplify the protest. As night fell, Miles and Ezra finally left the hospital, exhausted but wired. They drove to Miles' small apartment in Venice Beach, the sound of waves filling the silence. Inside, Ezra wheeled to the window, staring at the moonlit ocean. "This is bigger than us," he said softly. Miles knelt beside him, their hands intertwining. "Yeah, but we're in it together." He kissed Ezra's knuckles, feeling the warmth of their connection ground him. "I love you." Ezra's smile was soft, vulnerable. "Love you too." But his eyes were distant, already planning the next move. Miles knew that look. Ezra was a strategist, a fighter in his own way. And tomorrow they'd need every ounce of that fire. The next morning, the Santa Monica Pier was a sea of signs and voices. Hundreds had gathered, chanting for justice, their placards reading, "No more Holt," and "Protect the vulnerable." Miles and Ezra arrived early, joining Sasha and the queer advocacy group, who'd brought megaphones and a fierce determination. Lila, out of the hospital but still in her sling, was there with Victor, who stood like a sentinel beside her. Javier, nervous but resolute, held a sign that read, "I am not invisible." Ezra had spent the morning coaching him, helping him find his voice. "You're the heart of this," Ezra told him. "People need to hear you." Miles scanned the crowd, his paramedic instincts on high alert. He noticed Holt's absence but spotted several officers watching from a distance, their faces unreadable. The air was electric, charged with hope and anger. Sasha took the megaphone, her voice booming. "We're here because a cop thought he could hurt a disabled girl and walk away. We're here because a kid selling fruit was terrorized. We're here because enough is enough." The crowd roared, and Miles felt Ezra's hand squeeze his. They'd faced prejudice together, snide comments about their relationship, assumptions about Ezra's capabilities, but this was different. This was a fight for everyone who'd been pushed down. Victor spoke next, his voice steady but raw. "My daughter, Lila, is the strongest person I know. She stood up to a bully with a badge, and I'm damn proud of her. But this isn't just about her. It's about every kid like Javier, every person who's been told they don't matter." Lila, in her wheelchair, took the megaphone, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm not a victim. I'm a fighter, and we're fighting for justice today." The crowd erupted, and Miles felt a lump in his throat. He glanced at Ezra, whose eyes were shining with pride. "She's incredible," Ezra whispered. As the protest grew, news vans arrived, cameras rolling. Ezra's social media posts had done their job, drawing national attention. But the victory was bittersweet. Holt was on administrative leave, not fired, and the police department's response was a vague promise to investigate. That night, at a small diner near the pier, Miles, Ezra, Victor, Lila, Javier, and Sasha sat around a table, planning their next steps. Victor's military precision was evident, his suggestions sharp and strategic. "We keep the pressure on," he said. "Lawsuits, media, protests. Holt's not the only one. The system protects guys like him." Ezra nodded, his mind racing. "We need a bigger platform. National news, maybe a documentary. People need to see Javier's face, Lila's face." Miles watched them, his heart full but heavy. He knew this fight would test them all, especially him and Ezra, whose relationship was a quiet rebellion against a world that often rejected them. But as he reached for Ezra's hand under the table, he felt ready. For love, for justice, for change. Weeks later, the movement had grown. The videos from the pier had sparked protests across California, then the country. Holt was fired, charged with assault, but the fight was far from over. Miles and Ezra became fixtures at rallies, their love a quiet but powerful symbol of resilience. Lila, now a local hero, spoke at schools and community centers, her wheelchair a badge of courage. Javier, with Victor's help, got legal support to stay in the U.S., his fruit cart now a community-funded venture. Victor, once a solitary man hardened by war, found purpose in advocacy, mentoring kids like Javier and fighting for police reform. He and Lila grew closer, their bond forged in shared pain and triumph. "You're my hero, kid," he told her one night, his voice thick with emotion. One evening, Miles and Ezra drove to Big Sur, needing a moment away from the chaos. They parked at a cliff overlooking the Pacific, the sunset painting the sky in fiery hues. Ezra wheeled to the edge, Miles kneeling beside him, their hands clasped. The world felt vast, but their love was vaster. "We did something good," Ezra said, his voice soft. "But it's not enough." Miles nodded, his thumb tracing circles on Ezra's hand. "It's a start, and we'll keep going. Together." They kissed, the wind carrying their promise into the night. Below, a wooden signpost, weathered by time, bore the carved words, "Love defies all odds." It was a reminder that their fight, for Lila, for Javier, for each other, wasn't just about justice. It was about love, in all its fierce, unbreakable forms. And as the waves crashed below, Miles and Ezra knew they'd face whatever came next, side by side, their hearts a beacon against the storm.